So, I mean, listen, I feel like I've had to get this off my chest for a little while now, so I'm just going to say it. There's two tracks on which this Republican 2020 election fraud fantasy is playing out. And one of them is completely ridiculous, right? It's like science fiction fantasy with all the joy and surrealism and even the fantastic costumes that come with that genre. That first track on which this fantasy is playing out is in Trumpland. It's this idea that Trump secretly won re-election in 2020, that he's actually the real president. Joe Biden is a fraud who appears to be in the White House, but he really wasn't elected, so he shouldn't be there. After Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and a becostumed Trump lawyer named Sidney Powell went to a QAnon conspiracy theory convention this weekend in Texas and said Trump actually won the election and he's going to be reinstated as president this summer. And Flynn said we should have a U.S. military takeover, a military coup in this country to bring about the reinstatement of Trump as president. After that happened this weekend, New York Times Trump whisperer reporter Maggie Haberman reported earlier this week that Trump believes it, that Trump really is telling people that he believes he'll be reinstated as president by August this summer. After that reporting from Maggie Haberman at the Times, a pro-Trump columnist at a conservative magazine today confirmed Haberman's reporting, saying that indeed Trump believes he's going to be reinstated as president. He earnestly believes it. He's telling people that. He's also apparently telling everyone that Republican senators who lost in November, they'll be reinstated too. Martha McSally in Arizona and David Perdue in Georgia, they'll get their Senate seats back. Just as soon as the whole election is thrown out and he's put back in power and all the Republicans get, unousted. The Washington Post now confirming this basic reporting as well, that Trump insists he's going to be reinstated as president. It's insane, right? It's palpably insane. But it's also working for them right now. It's working for them among Trump supporters and among Republicans, most of whom do now believe that the 2020 election wasn't real. It was fraudulent and Trump was actually reelected, even though Joe Biden's in the White House. It is objectively nuts, but it is real enough to them because they prefer that to reality, and importantly, because Trump keeps saying it's real. And because Republicans in states from Arizona to Georgia to Wisconsin and beyond, they keep backing him up, saying there was something wrong with the election in those states, something wrong that needs to be audited or recounted or investigated. And as nuts as it all is, it is basically the agreed upon reality among Trump supporters coast to coast now. And so we're about to enter into a particularly volatile time with this, because Trump is going to give a speech to the North Carolina Republican Party at their state convention the day after tomorrow. In a fundraising email about that speech, he is billing it as a presidential address because he is pretending to still be president. He sent out fundraising texts today, calling that speech an official presidential speech, as if he is still president. Next week in Wisconsin, the pillow company CEO, Mike Lindell, is hosting another of these Trump is the real president convention things. It's the one he's hosting in Wisconsin started off with this promotional flyer, but then on Tuesday this week, the flyer changed to reflect the fact that Trump himself will be making an appearance at that event. They are billing him, as you can see there on the flyer, as the, quote, real president. Our real president. I mean, this is one of the two tracks on which the Trump Republican 2020 election fraud fantasy is playing out. It is, in fact, absolutely ridiculous. There's no provision in our country for a former president being reinstated. Joe Biden won the election by kind of a lot. Republican members of Congress tried to stop the certification of the votes from states that Biden won, but that effort failed. Then on that same day, armed and violent Trump supporters tried to force the stopping of the counting of the Electoral College results in Congress. Right? On January 6th, we saw what they were willing to do to try to make it not so that Trump lost the election. But Trump lost and Biden won, and Biden really is president. At the same time that Biden is president, though, we are in this unprecedented situation where there really is a former president out there earnestly pretending that he is still the rightful president, telling that to everyone who will listen to him, and even telling it to those who don't want to listen to him anymore. You know, he's doing right-wing radio shows now where he says about Biden, how do you govern when you lost? As nuts as it seems, Months after the election, the guy pretending he's still president has actually succeeded in getting Republicans to cast doubt on the clear and certified election results in Arizona, and soon in multiple other states, including Georgia and Wisconsin. He is telling people he's the rightful president, that he will be reinstated. He's about to start speeches to that effect and a series of rallies to that effect as well. My question to you is this. Think about this in a quiet moment. What is the end game of that? Where does that go? What does that ultimately spark among his followers? I mean, the way that first track of the Republican election, Trump Republican election fraud fantasy is playing out in Trump land, it is as ridiculous as it is dangerous. I mean, seriously, for the foreseeable future, there is no scenario now in which Republican Trump supporters are going to accept election results anywhere in the country if that election doesn't produce the results they are demanding. That damage is done. Republicans are not just, against Democrats now. They are against democracy now. Significant numbers, if not majorities of Republican voters will denounce and disbelieve the results of elections. They will treat elections as crime scenes and hoaxes unless they win for the foreseeable future. That, I think, is baked in already. That's a crisis for our country. Beyond that, though, I think it's also worth thinking about what the logical next steps are for our fellow Americans who truly earnestly believe this nonsense, who really take it into their hearts and believe that Trump is still the rightful president, that Joe Biden is an imposter president in the White House who's somehow stolen power and taken over the U.S. government illegally. I mean, Trump wants to be reinstated as president. He thinks he can be. He will tell his supporters that they must demand that they must fight for that. How will they try to do that? What exactly do we expect them to do? What wouldn't they do? What does this lead to? When a major political party starts indulging this kind of stuff, it doesn't end in let's have a better get out the vote effort in 2022. It doesn't end up with, how do we up our outreach to Latino voters? This doesn't end in anything that looks like politics. Not when you're telling people that there's a tyrant who lost the election, who's stolen power, who is claiming to be the president. And he's not, and the former leader must be reinstated by the people. That is something that doesn't end in a political place. That is a road that ends in a very bad place, and we are way down that road already. And I'm not trying to be scary about this, but I find the place we are in here to be scary. That's track one for the Trump Republican election fraud fantasy about 2020. There is a second track, though, on which that fantasy is also playing out. And that's the one you can see track its way through the considerable mud that's all over the floor of, for example, the Republican-led Missouri state legislature with all of its problems, the one thing they want to work on. It's this opportunistic pretext. Well, if Trump's going to raise doubts all over the country about how elections are run and how votes are counted, then Republicans can use that as an excuse to not just fantasize great excuses for their losses, to not just stoke suspicions of democracy and elections among their supporters, but they can use that as pretext to pass real laws, to make voting hard, to make voting as hard as possible, to take away voting rights, to make sure that small d democratically inclined voters in their states have as many hurdles as possible thrown into their path on the way to the voting booth. And it does not look like there's going to be federal cavalry riding to the rescue on this. I mean, not unless conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin changes his mind on voting rights, and maybe not even then. But in the absence of something like the For the People Act passing into law, the For the People Act would protect voting rights in every state nationwide. In the absence of that passing, Senator Manchin, the fight to protect the right to vote, it comes from this crazy place that has also led Trump to pretend to be the shadow president. But it has led to concrete action in state after state. And the fight to preserve the right to vote, in the absence of any federal help, it's happening right now state to state, law by law, one after the other. Democrats fighting Republicans over this stuff in the state legislatures. And then if they can't stop it in those state legislatures and those things pass into law, the fight moves into the courts, state by state, one after the other, all over the country. That's all we've got right now for voting rights. I mean, track one of the Trump Republican election fraud fantasy brings the country to the brink of madness. But track 2 in the states brings us to what is now a fully joined, full-time, urgent, state-by-state fight for democratic rights. It's just as insane.